Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seatrade Crew's webinar on how COVID-19 will affect the future of food and beverage and hotel operations. Thank you all for joining us from literally all over the world. My name is Ryan Stana from RWS Entertainment Group, and I am today's moderator for the presentation. First, a few housekeeping notes before we begin. I want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar and a link will be sent to all of you participating tomorrow. So don't feel like you have to write down crazy notes. This link will be sent to you tomorrow and you can watch it, share it with your family, share it with your friends, your cousins, everybody. If you are having difficulty hearing us today and are listening through your computer, please check that your speaker volume is turned up, or message us in the chat box located to the right of your screen and we will assist you with your issue. So now I would like to introduce you to today's panel. First, I would like to introduce you to Alia Abou-Assali, who is the Vice President of Purchasing and Logistics from Apollo Group. She will speak to about us with the food and beverage supply chain disruption and what will be considered as the industry recovers. Next, I would like to introduce you to Jon Burrows, the Vice President of Operations at AmaWaterways River Cruising. AmaWaterways is celebrating 18 years of service and will be one of the first cruise lines to begin operation post-COVID. They actually started on July 5th with one European ship, so I'm sure Jon has a lot of knowledge to share with us. Next, I would like to introduce sort of the wild card of today's webinar, who is Christopher Smith. He is the Corporate Director of Food and Beverage and the Executive Chef for Herschend Family Entertainment. He operates mega amusement parks and resorts such as Dollywood and Silver Dollar City, and those parks and resorts have started operating, and he hopefully will be able to give us tips and tricks on their COVID operations. Now, the reason why I say hopefully is Chris had an operations emergency right prior to this webinar, so we are unsure if he's going to be able to join us or not. He might pop in halfway through, so just again, it's a wild card. We hope Chris is able to be there with us. But you know, if Dolly Parton calls for you, you have to run. So fingers crossed he'll join us. We feel that the information that these individuals have learned in these sectors in food and beverage and hotel ops will be very helpful for all of us today. So first, sort of as an icebreaker before we start, I want to ask both of you to sort of tell us your favorite cruise memory that you had through the years. So who wants to take it first, Alia or Jon?
I can go first. So I have two actually, but they're both in Russia. One is when I was brand new in the industry, 2002, long transatlantic flight connecting through London, almost 30 hours of travel, and arrived on board a ship in St. Petersburg. And you're always told, and you understand when you work in the river cruising, that sometimes ships berth together. I probably fell asleep, jet lag, woke up a number of hours later, curtains wide open with the ship next to me's dining room staring at me fast asleep. So that's when you learn you should probably draw the curtains when you're working in Russia. And the other one is also Russia. Around 2007, 2008, our first ship in Russia, built ship in Russia with AmaWaterways as we were then, AmaWaterways as we are today. Second day of the cruise, the menus are put out, guests can see what we're eating. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the chef finally realizes that we have nothing actually on the menu in the store that we can cook, so the guests have no food that's on the menu available for that evening. So we can either change the menu, or actually the owner's son and I happened to be on board, so we got in a taxi, and I think I know every single supermarket in St. Petersburg, and we were buying every piece of filet that was available in the entire city and province of St. Petersburg. And we did this for about 2 days actually. So there was a storage problem, or a F.M.P problem in terms of Alia would probably testify to, getting produce to the ship on day 1, day 2, day 3 of a brand new vessel. So think on your feet, into a taxi, and away you go. And I know all of the supermarkets. So if you need any tips, I can tell you where they all are.
Well, you achieved success. That's all that matters, right?
I think so. I'm not sure. We certainly had a lot of beef in the back of a taxi.
There you go. Alia, your favorite cruise memory?
Okay, so maybe I'm not too much of a funny person, but my experience is I always like it when I go on board because I communicate a lot via emails, being on the purchasing and logistics side. And when there are issues with containers not arriving on time or problems, the first phone call comes to me, and sometimes in the middle of the night, and we start working on resolving the issues. Including going from one Publix to another here in Miami, supermarkets, getting yogurt they forgot to order, for example, to a point that one time the ship forgot to order the yogurt and we had to go to like 5 or 6 supermarkets to collect the quantity they needed. And when I was checking on one of the counters in one of the supermarkets, the lady said, "Wow, you must like this yogurt a lot." So as much as I was buying. But it's always gratifying when you go on board and introduce yourself and people know you only by name and, "Oh, thank you, you helped us." And then you see the result of the work you do on the shore side. The products we buy, you see the food, the service, the sheets, the towels. So that's always something nice to see and satisfying.
I feel quite relieved actually that we're not the only cruise line that has supply problems sometimes.
No, that's the norm.
So Alia, my question for you is, do you like yogurt?
Yes, I do, but not to that extent, to buy 200 pieces of yogurt in one day.
Overkill, not good for the diet. And since Chris isn't here to share a story, we'll just decide what cruise line is going to sell him a cruise. And he'll have to buy it since he was not joining us today. But anyhow, the goal of today is to share information and best practice on the future of F&B and hotel ops on board ships when cruising resumes. We will discuss key obstacles and ways to adapt and overcome them. In addition to the questions all the participants have sent us today, we also had a very talkative roundtable on June 23rd with executives from F&B and hotel ops from cruise lines all over the world. So in addition to the questions the participants sent in, this roundtable came up with questions as well. Also, if you want to ask more questions, please go on the chat section under questions and type them in. After we get through the questions that were submitted to us, I will have an open forum where I will ask our panelists those questions. So if you think of something during this webinar, please type them in to the chat box on the right and we'll try and cover them at the end. Okay, let's begin. First in food and beverage, and Alia, since you're a lover of yogurt, with the expiration dates, which yogurt has expiration dates, on food products, who has had success with what avenues as far as returning products to manufacturers or finding other outlets for these products, such as selling products at a lesser price or ultimately donating them?
Okay, so here at Apollo, we are a concessionaire, so we supply our own products to the ships we have contracts with. Plus, we also sell to other customers and other cruise lines. So we kind of faced it on both fronts. When the stop happened on a Friday, and there was already product on the floor, there were containers which we literally had to bring them back from the port over here when we learned of the stop. We were more lucky to return the product that was on the floor and the containers we returned because that was happened just that same week. But there were many containers already in the ports where the ship were going to visit or on their way to the different ports. And the problem was with these containers in a way because we had to bring them back. And it took some time. If a container had arrived to a port, you couldn't just bring it immediately because they considered it as in the country already. You had to re-export it. With the COVID-19 situation, many countries were on lockdown, customs were not working or working very minimal hours, shipping lines also, there were curfews, people working from home, reduced hours. So it took some time to return the containers back. Now, mind you, the ships were in parts of the world where the transit time was long. So these containers were already loaded in January and February. So by the time they came back to Miami or Europe, wherever we sent them, was by the end of April. So many products have expired by then, which we had to throw away. We tried to see if we can return anything. Actually, we didn't return anything that we bought Apollo to supply our ships, but we were asked by some of the clients that bought the product from us if we can take back, just like they asked any other supplier. And we took back anything that had a long shelf life, liquors, wines, dry shelf-stable items. Some items we said take back that will expire after October 30 or September 30. So we helped in that way. Also, the product we had in our warehouse, which we bought to sell and supply our ships, that we had challenges with. We tried to see if we can sell anything. There were items that were popular, like the PPEs. If you had gloves, toilet paper, paper towels, things that were on short on the market, the prices skyrocketed, and we were able to sell these things actually. Chilled and frozen things were very difficult to return because they said they do not trust the cold chain has not been broken along the way. So, and because of their HACCP regulations, they wouldn't take back many of the suppliers. Some did. So we tried to renegotiate some terms, either extend the credit terms or pay when we deliver these things on board if you don't want to take them back. Or even work with manufacturers to extend the shelf life, that give us letters that it can be used beyond the best buy or shelf life date that was put on the products. Some suppliers, we were able to work restocking fees with them also if they took it back. So we took a loss on that. We still did not resolve everything, and on weekly basis we are going through the inventories based on the expiration dates and what can we do. In terms of selling things, it was very difficult. There were a lot of people who are interested in getting the list and see what they can buy, but not too many answers came back. Whoever wanted to buy like a frozen salmon fillet at 45 cents a pound. So it's practically you're giving it away. We also donated some of the things, but it was difficult for us to donate because most of our product is in bulk size. We had 50-pound bag rice, I mean, and most of the organizations were concentrating on households. So we were able to donate very few products, like maybe individual cereal packs, maybe tea bags, things that are in a small pack that a house could use. We donated some of the stuff to kitchens that were doing cooking and donating meals, but also there it was very limited. You could donate chicken, you could donate maybe pork ribs or something like that, but not something very specialized and very expensive or something like that. So yeah, we had to be look into all options and see how can we manage with what we have, and we still do every day up until now.
Of course, thank you so much for that, Alia. I'm going to turn this over to Jon now. It's a two-part question. Prior to opening, how did you plan your F&B operations? I know that's a loaded question. And also the second to this is, how will catering be organized in general, especially the buffets, which is a major hot topic.
So I mean, just prior to the webinar starting, I had mentioned to Ryan that any answer I give is with a bit of a caveat. We do have a ship under operation. It did start on Sunday. A second embarkation is actually today. So anything I'm giving you now is based on that experience, and it's with a German client. We're a North American river cruise company. So traditionally our clients are predominantly North American, something like 85–90% of our guests are from the US. We're working with a German tour operator, so it's a German clientele. So in this particular case, obviously, meeting with the client, the charterer of the vessel, and changing our North American slanted interpretation of food and beverage to a more German style interpretation of food and beverage. Cruising in Germany, so German guests cruising in Germany with German style food, that was the top of our priority. The nature of river cruising is a little bit different. Our ships are a lot smaller than ocean going vessels. We have something between 120 and 160 guests on board, averaging around 140. So we've always done and always had the ability to do single seater dining. With the current restrictions of operating in Europe, you can't have full capacity. It's not 50%, you're actually working at 100 guests on board and then the crew. So finding the ability to cater and feed guests for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in an environment where you can only put 100 people with the correct social distancing, that actually came into the food and beverage consideration. Our restaurants can't actually do 100 people. Our one restaurant, we would have one restaurant and a fine dining restaurant in the back, which is a lot smaller. So obviously we had to think about how we're going to plan the dining experience based around the capacity of the restaurants. So that again came into the planning of the F.M.P. With social distancing, it's around 60 people we can fit in one dining room. That became very important. Therefore, we had to come up with, and we've never done this before, this is something you don't normally do on river cruising. We had to give a very limited in-cabin dining menu so that if we needed to, we could have some relief of capacity by having an in-room dining menu for those guests. So again, a consideration. We have free flowing wine and beer during lunch and dinner. When you're doing in-cabin dining, obviously that's a little bit different. We only have around 38 staff on board our ships. We don't have hundreds and hundreds, and you can't have waiters running from location to location to deliver wine to the cabins. So we had to develop concepts of how to give drinks to guests and still maintain our brand and strategy. Inside the restaurants themselves, yes, very important. Buffets, they are no more, basically. As a river cruise operator, and we all tend to operate the same way, breakfast was always buffet, with a few items on an a la carte menu, steak and eggs. Lunch was a bit of a hybrid. Yes, definitely a buffet, but yes, definitely an a la carte menu. And then dinner was always a la carte. Now that's completely changed. Everything is a la carte. But breakfast is being done. That's probably the hardest one to manage because you don't have guests arriving at one time. They're coming in at certain times. It depends on what time people get up. So we have, let's call it, packaged menu items, if that makes sense. We have like a healthy well-being breakfast for those that want to be a little more fit. We've got French or continental breakfast, so-called North American breakfast, which is bacon and eggs, that sort of stuff. Not necessarily I'd like this type of egg and that type of bacon. They haven't got the freedom to cherry pick items off the a la carte breakfast menu. It's a packaged breakfast concept of this is the style of breakfast I would like. Things we do an early risers breakfast, typically, traditionally on our ships. That was always put in the lounge and it was a self-serve. There's a jug of juice, there's some croissants, there's some coffee. We can't do that anymore because we have to have it served. So anytime there was a served situation, now we actually have to have crew standing there serving the guests rather than coming to. Bar service is not allowed. You can't walk up to the bar on ships in Europe anymore. This is in the interior of Europe, in the actual internal waterways. So you actually have to do served bar service, which everybody always wants. It's a much better serving experience, guest experience for the guest, but it's incredibly hard to do when you have limited crew capacity. So all of those were considerations, and it's totally evolving. So everything we started on Sunday has been modified, and we'll start a new way of doing it today. We actually have embarkation today.
And Jon, how have the guests taken to it? I know it's only been so many days, but what's the feedback you're hearing on the ship?
So we have 56 guests, or had 56 guests. They've left, and we've got, I don't know, there's 23 staying on and doing 10 days. So I think we've got 62, 63 guests on, or either on board or embarking today. It's gone incredibly well. a lot of the things were dealt with beforehand, and I know that's probably a little bit of a question later in terms of our communication through the tour operator to the guests, so setting their expectations before they arrived. And this is a tour operator that normally sells a lot lower standard of river cruise to their guests, and for the first cruises they only went out to their past guests, so the guests traveled on European tour operators, cruise lines, and now they're with a North American, and the difference in our F&B services is very markedly different, and they've really enjoyed it. It's gone incredibly well.
That's wonderful to hear. So this is either for Alia or Jon. Will the ban of plastic on ships be reversed, as it has been suggested that plastic materials are less likely to carry the virus? Any thoughts on that?
I can give you firsthand experience. We had, as most cruise lines, made the conversion, would have made the conversion to glass bottles, etc., on the first day of our season, which is roughly the third week in March. Obviously, there was no season, or hasn't been a season so far this year, and so there was no glass situation. When we started to think about the F&B for this German tour operator that's taking a ship, we made this decision to actually use plastic bottles for exactly the reason you mentioned, but also because of weight and the limited number of crew on board. We don't have a full complement of crew, so it's easier for loading and unloading if it's plastic rather than glass. And yes, we are fully aware that this is not environmentally friendly.
Got it. Very, very helpful information.
Also, you know, it's not like they are pushing back on that, but there is more use of plastic. For example, the plastic film, because it's the best way of protection now. So there will be more use of plastic, even if they do not roll back using paper straws instead of, let's say, plastic straws. So there will be more introduction of plastic items because of that, because of the virus.
Okay, here's another one. Is there going to be any change in the way ice cubes are produced and handled? Any ideas on that?
We had a long discussion about this with our hotel operations side about should we only have one ice machine on the ship. Again, with obviously so limited number of guests and cabins, you only have one ice machine, and we draw the, I mean, not on the side of how they're produced and handled, but we are allowing guests to use the ice buckets, basically because the type that we have, there's no way that a guest can actually contaminate by putting their hand inside. It's not one where you can free an ice cube to dislodge it if it's stuck. So we are using our ice machine on the ship that's operating right now.
Got it. Alia, do you have any thoughts on that?
I actually asked some people on the ships, and I'm gonna read you what they answered me. They said, our ice makers are industrial type. We have strict cleaning and sanitation procedures for those and frequent sampling for pathogens. So close supervision and sanitation.
Great, that's really helpful. Okay, next we're going to move into the hotel operations side of things with questions. Again, if you have any additional questions on F&B, feel free to ask it in the question side on the end, that we will get to the wrap up at the end of this call. Hopefully I can ask some of those questions, so feel free to type them in. But so hotel operations, this is for both of you. How are other companies, specifically cruise lines, attacking new contracts that they have to sign in the new year without really knowing what the volumes are going to look like? Are they going to look at new contracts for next year without volume commitments? Jon and Alia, take it away.
Alia, over to you first.
Okay, so believe it or not, we are even now receiving RFQs because, like I said before, we are a supplier to some cruise lines, and we are even currently now receiving RFQs. We are being given the usage figures they had last year, but on our own and from experience, some of them tell us that if we start, the occupancy will not be, at least in the beginning, will not be 100%, 50 to 60. So we're trying to take last year's usage figures and working with the cruise lines, kind of try to get an idea, but nobody expects more than 50 to 60%, at least in the first few months. And we all know from past experiences, I've been around too long. I lived the September 11 situation when we did not bring all the ships together. It was a a gradual bringing ships into operation. So you will have less ships operating in the beginning, and even the ships operating will have less occupancy, especially now that they are talking about even if you have a normal operation, you will not be able to have 100% occupancy because you need to allow for social distancing and some suites or areas for isolation if needed. So this is how we are going by it. Also trying to work with our partners and our suppliers that these are figures we're estimating, but we are not sure how things go, and we could review every couple months or every month and see, or every quarter, and see how we have to in a way that we are not held for usages, nothing contract signed that you need to use it, and at the same time try to protect against also fluctuations in the market, because at this time everything is uncertain.
Great.
I mean, ours is essentially the same. And when we get operating this year, we will be consolidating. So we would not put all ships into rotation. It would be a much reduced fleet. We feel the same about 2021 as well. It would be reduced capacity either based on local legislation, local authorities deeming that you can only have reduced capacity, and the fact that we know that some guests won't travel. But I mean, as a positive note for everybody here that's in the cruise industry, I can tell you that the month of June was the highest booking month we've had in the 18-year history of our company, both financially in terms of guest counts. Now, yes, I will say that some of that has moved guests from suspended sailings in 2020 to advanced sailings in 21 and 22, but needless to say, that's a fantastic piece of information for all of us that, at least in the river cruise industry, it's quite resilient and people are still determined to travel. So in terms of planning ahead and contracting, we're doing exactly the same. You have to be cautious, no long-term commitments. We're quite in the lucky position that we can get a ship up and running in 6 weeks from scratch with no crew on board and in its mothball state for the winter. Obviously 8 weeks is preferred. So our lead-in time for F&B is a lot shorter. We don't need the long advanced planning. We're always in terrestrial water, so our supply chain is just a couple of dozen kilometers over land, not via sea.
Great. And next, we're going to turn this over to Jon. Jon, you're sort of going to be the star in this hotel ops section since Chris is not here. So Alia, if you want to jump in at certain times, that's great, but I'm going to direct a lot of these to Jon. So Jon, how do you convince future customers that a cruise ship, or in Chris's case, a resort, is prepared for healthy and a safe environment?
I think the way to do this is to create guest or guest client confidence in your brand. Part of that is obviously is messaging in the information you're putting out, either by direct. We are a company that sells through travel agencies, consortia, large alliances of travel agencies and tour operators. We have very little direct business. So our communication chain is via the travel agent, travel advisor community. So our messaging to them is number one, what we're doing, what steps we're taking, what steps we think we're going to be taking. We're using obviously the guidelines of the CDC, the WHO, the recent documentation that came out 10 days ago or so from the European Union, the EU Healthy Gateways guidelines. And in our industry, within the river cruise industry, the European river cruise industry, there is an association called IGE, IG River Cruise. They also have put guidelines on how to operate, precautions and protocols to take, making those into a format that the guests can understand, to give confidence that you can operate safely. And then of course you're planning what to do in the eventuality, should there be a case, the scenarios you go through, how to get the guests from airplane to transfer vehicle onto ship, to cruise them safely, and then to get them off at the end. The way that you have that planned as a confidence level, that's probably the easiest way of doing it. And then of course to demonstrate, to show your guests that you are traveling, that you are operating, that you don't have any situations, to create that confidence in the marketplace. I mean, for all of us.
So when your guests entered and were sailing this past week, what were some changes that you did, just visual changes, to boost the confidence of the guests when they came on board?
So we have, again, we're probably in a lucky position because river cruise ships are quite small. We have one main restaurant, one lounge. If you go into our lounge today, you will see plexiglass screens dividing the seating. By doing that, at least under the current legislation that we have, or I shouldn't say legislation, guidelines we have in Europe, if you have plexiglass screens separating seating, the guests can actually sit down and not wear a mask. Yes, it looks a little bit boxy, but it's clear perspex, so it looks okay, but it's a way that the guests can sit near-ish, again with social distancing, but feel secure that if somebody is coughing or sneezing or breathing or singing or whatever they're doing, there is a barrier between themselves and the next guests. Our guests have to wear a mask, a face covering, when moving from cabin to lounge, cabin to restaurant. Anytime they're in public, if we use that expression, they have to wear a face mask. We have temperature checks upon arrival. So before the guests even get to the ship themselves, we have a control point with a security. They're taking the temperature, they're marking it down, and then every day when the guests go to breakfast, we're also taking their temperature. So it's a way of monitoring on a moving basis their temperatures over the course of the cruise duration.
Great.
And then we have plexiglass at the reception. We have plexiglass at the cruise manager's desk, the hotel manager's desk. So there's a barrier between the guest and the crew working.
It's wonderful. In addition,
hand sanitizers everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Everyone's covered in it 24/7.
And so how are you addressing the cleanliness of soft goods?
Yeah,
with bacteria and germs, guest to guest, etc.
So what we have, I mean, just looking at housekeeping as a starting point for this. Typically on a ship, we only have 74 to 82 cabins. We have one vessel that has 98. So our housekeeping department is quite small. And traditionally, they would have operated on a system where one steward looks after 6 to 8 cabins. And they would have actually had one cloth that's for doing the bathroom, once for the flap services. Now every single cabin has its own set of cleaning equipment. So it's no longer cabin to cabin. Every single cabin has a rotation of 4 cleaning sets, so that surfaces are in green cloth, windows are in blue cloth, and every single cabin has its own. And we do twice daily cleanings now. So not just the one major turnover a day, there's one in the morning and one in the afternoon. It's not just making the bed and doing a turn down service, it's doing a full cleaning. Some other examples, again, with the nuances of river cruising, we basically have food deliveries every day. And it would be normally would be a situation where the kitchen team would come out, the galley team would come out, and they would be wearing their chef's overalls, take the produce from the delivery truck into the storage area. Now no one's allowed to do that. They have to change, they have to put on overalls, so that there's a distinct difference between their onboard equipment, their clothing, and their delivery clothing, so that they make a complete separation. We have continual cleaning on the surfaces in the ship. So it means every handrail gets continually cleaned, every bar table gets continually cleaned out. I don't mean there's somebody one chair, one stool, one table, but they go on a rotation through the ship, continually cleaning. So that's just some of the measures that help to mitigate. Public bathrooms are now closed on board the ship, so that guests have to always return to their own cabin to use the restroom. Again, it's quite convenient for us, because the maximum distance you're ever going to walk from lounge to the very, very far cabins is around 80 meters. If you're in the suites closest to the lounge, you're going to walk 20 meters and you're in your cabin. So it's not a massive distance that they have to walk. But those are some of the precautions: additional cleaning, separation of equipment, even down to the uniform basis.
Great. And Alia, anything you want to add to what Jon has been saying?
No, I think, I mean, when passengers see how many times you are cleaning and all the measures you are taking, I mean, of course, we all know that there is no 100% guarantee of no risk at all, but at least you are doing your best and taking all the precautions, working with the organizations like the CDC, WHO. Here in the US, many companies are working with very well-known faces in the CDC, like previous commissioners of the FDA or previous head of the CDC, to put together the plans and get it approved from CDC. So I think this will also create a confidence in the clients that every cruise line is doing their best and going out of their way to make it a safe and a good experience also.
We've done a bit of a psychological tilt on this as well.
Yeah.
Typically, traditionally, we would clean when the guests were not around, when they were ashore doing shore excursions at night. We've completely changed the way that we clean the vessel to be, I hate to use this expression, in the face of the guests, so that our cleaning team, our housekeeping team, are visual, seen to be doing the cleaning, so that the guests feel much reassured. And again, it's that confidence level. The thing that we've also talked about and been quite well in publicizing is the fact that the air conditioning systems on river cruise vessels are very different. We do not circulate air, so there is no air being drawn in, being chilled, and then being pushed out. That doesn't happen on a river cruise ship. Individual cabins have their own air cooling systems, which always draws fresh air from outside, so it's not circulating. They've all got their own air conditioning system in the cabin. And in the public spaces, for want of a better term, we have something akin to a swamp cooler, where air is drawn from the outside, chilled, and then falls down naturally from above. It doesn't get pushed out. So there's no recirculation of air on board a river cruise ship, at least on our river cruise ships.
Yeah, there's resorts that we operate a lot of. We have a clean team of about 6 people that their job is just to be cleaning in front of the guests, and that the guest comments are extreme, saying we love seeing these people, we feel so safe, and they're just there for theatrical side of things. They are cleaning, but they're specific there to visualize with the guest. So that's interesting to hear, Jon. So look, we've been talking a lot about the guest side of things. What challenges are you having, Jon or Alia, have you heard with employees adapting to new procedures in the workplace?
Yeah, it was somewhat of a challenge in actually getting some crew members to our ships, to the ship, sorry, that was operating last Sunday. Most of our crew are from Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, which is terrestrial travel within Europe. The Hungarian crew had an immensely hard time getting out because Hungary was on a real lockdown. I mean, they could not leave Hungary. So we started the season with very few Hungarian crew members on board, only those that were living outside of Hungary. And the same with Romania. Our nautical team, our sailors are predominantly Romanian, and we had a tough time getting them out. We did, of course, eventually, but it was not easy. On board the ships, we have our crew, it's mandatory whenever they're working outside of the crew area, they have to wear face coverings. And we are experimenting, by the way. So we thought initially we would use shields, the shields that come down. Then we thought we would use shields that come up. Sometimes you see dentists wearing those in North America because it's easier to breathe and it goes up rather than with a shield it goes down. In reality, we tested different models, and we came to the conclusion actually a surgical face covering was the most comfortable during a working shift duration. Yes, the crew feel very hot. It can be very hot when you're working, especially if you're loading supplies, if you're the sailors and you're attaching the mooring ropes. That's heavy work, but all crew must and have to wear face coverings. The certain crew members have to wear gloves, depending on what facility or which position they have on the vessel and what task they're doing. So ensuring that the crew also follow social distancing guidelines, not just in the guest area of the ship, but also in the crew area of the ship. So it means we have less crew on board than we normally do because we have less guests, but it means we can socially distance the crew in their cabins. So yes, we do have quad cabins, so now we only have twin share cabins. So you help mitigate their exposure. The crew was also put into quarantine before they came on board, and we did testing of every crew member before they were even allowed to look at the ship. And then when they were cleared for not having COVID, were they allowed on board? And we do constant and regular checking of the crew temperatures twice a day. And they're given constant tutoring, mentoring, enforcement of the social distancing and covering policies. So those were big shifts for the crew. I mean, for the wait staff, I mean, all of us here in the cruise industry, we all know that sometimes your wait staff are the champions of your cruise line because that's the greatest interaction point with your guests. That breakfast, lunch, and dinner experience where the guests are hands-on with your wait staff. Wearing a face covering, surgical face covering, you can't see that smile, you can't see that interaction. I should have mentioned earlier, by the way, we have assigned seating with the German guests. We don't do that on our own vessels. It's a way of mitigating the risk of contact tracing, so that, you know, one cabin is in this specific table for the duration of the cruise. So that interaction is a hard thing for the wait staff. They're so used to chatting and being social with the guests that it's a little bit limited. You can't see the smile.
Great, that's very helpful. Now, are you planning to utilize C-Care or C-Event to leverage current functionality to address COVID-19?
I mean, we had talked about this earlier. As a river cruise operator, we don't use C-Care or C-Event because we don't actually have sea days. We're always in sovereign terrestrial territory. The joy or benefit of a river cruise is we can literally pull the ship over. It takes about 2 minutes to stop a vessel. By the time you've called the local health authority, the emergency number, you can have emergency service, EMT, at the vessel. And because we're in the sovereign territorial waters of the European Union all the time we're sailing, we have to abide by, and we're talking specifically here about COVID-19, obviously, we have to abide by the national or regional or local health authorities guidelines. So if they say, if there were to be a case on board and they say you've got to call 119 in Germany, we have to call 119 and pull the ship over. And then we're at the hands of the local health authority. So we don't use it. Yes, we are, though, looking at using more terrestrial based organizations like Falk, like AP companies. AP companies looks after insurance, medical procedures if you have a travel insurance. And we're also working with SOS International, basically to manage the cases of possible or potential COVID-19 in a mobile ship. I mean, we're all in the industry, the cruise industry. Our ships move from one location to the next. So we can be in France one day and, you know, 24 hours later, we're in the Netherlands. So we have to be, we feel we might have to use an outside agency to help manage guests that may have COVID-19 in terms of quarantining and looking after them and getting them tested.
Great, thank you for that. For both of you, what impact, if any, do you see the use of touch screens and self-service kiosks having on the industry or individual ship ops? Or are there any other technology investments being done? So Alia, do you have any thoughts on that? So maybe Jon can get a drink of water.
Although I can answer this one as well.
Yeah. More operation than me, but I mean, of course, our teams are working on that, and it's a work in progress what we would be doing. Everybody talks about the touchless thermometers and try to have contactless operation as much as possible. I know also being in purchasing, I got emails every single day, tons of emails about what's out in the market to help enhance safety and enhance getting a touchless and a contactless operation as much as possible.
And we are absolutely doing this. We've had discussions with Qualcomm here in the United States because they're supplying offices with the contactless, looks a little bit like an iPad thermal image camera that also does facial recognition. We've had discussions with Resco. Our ship management system on board is Resco. They have 2 modules, one that's out right now. It utilizes a Caterpillar cell phone, which I didn't even know the Caterpillar made cell phones until this actually. I guess it's for engineers. It has a thermal image camera within it. And what they've done is they've created a software platform that integrates with our security equipment we have on board. So the swipe in, swipe out that we have on board already, they've already developed, Resco's already developed a module that integrates with it for basically you hold a cell phone up to the guest and it takes their temperature, and it's a green for you could come on board and a red for you can't. And they have a second generation. Second generation they have is exactly the same as a German company we're looking at, which is exactly the same as Qualcomm have in the United States. It's basically looks like an iPad. It stands on a stand. The guest looks at it. It does facial recognition. So the guest, as the pre-boarding procedure, can upload a picture of themselves. They come on board. It recognizes who it is. Says you can come on board. It takes the temperature. Says you can't come on board or you can come on board. And it's also the gangway security. So we know whether somebody is on board or off board all in one. That will be ready. Well, the Qualcomm say it's ready right now. Resco is working with a Chinese operator. There's a German company doing exactly the same for the hardware. They think it could be ready by August, September of this year. And it's also integrated, and we wouldn't do this, we don't need to. It works with, you can actually integrate it with a thermal camera that you can affix to the hardware of the ship, so that as guests are walking by, we only have one gangway, so as they're walking up the single gangway, it can start to scan all crew, and this is not just for the guests, it's for the crew as well. You could scan the guest crew coming up the gangway before they even get to the vessel. So we're definitely looking at this.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Jon and Alia. So now I'm going to turn it over to the questions the participants on this webinar have been asking during this time. Anyone participating, stop your questions now because I'm not going to be able to get through them all. So I'm going to focus on the ones that I can. And I'm going to actually, Alia, Jon had the first question, but I'm going to move it to Alia first. So Jon can have another drink of water. Here we go. So Alia, managing the cruise F&B supply chains require unique skills both for the cruise line personnel as well as the vendors who call the cruise lines their customers. At the lines, there have been many layoffs and furloughs, and the same can be said for the vendors who enable the F&B supply chain, those companies who have survived the crisis. Can you, Alia, comment on how the COVID cruise operation stoppage will impact the human capital who possess the unique skills to manage the F&B supply chain? That was a whammy for you.
I had to make notes for that one.
So unfortunately, yes, we all suffered from furloughs and layoffs. What we tried to do is try not to furlough or get rid of the skills that we had as much as possible. We at Apollo tried to, we're all in it together, for example, try to reduce hours for everybody because we wanted to retain or like take salary cuts to help survive longer and prolong it as long as we can, because we did not want to lose the skills and the talents that we had. We're in continuous touch with the people who are not at least in the office or working all the time or just staying at home. So we understand the value of the human element. Because when we go back to business, we will need all these people, and we didn't want to go out and look for talents and skills at that time. I guess that's how we're doing it here.
That's great. I'm going to turn it over to Jon, and you can rest after that question. So Jon, with the new COVID policies, did you require additional crew on board than you normally had on board?
No. So what we did is we approached this in a pre-boarding way, so that every guest before embarking has to fill out a pre-cruise health questionnaire, and the questions are very poignant. Have you been exposed? Have you been tested? If you were tested, were the results negative? Where have you been? And a whole series of questions that would enable us to at least potentially, if the guests answer the question correctly, at least determine whether we think or thought they were going to be a risk of coming on board. And again, in the situation where we have the one vessel operating right now, there's a lot of interaction with the actual German tour operator. We look at the results, the questionnaire results, and we say, like, this particular guest, can you follow up? They answer this question, it could be interpreted two ways. So it means that when they come on board, just using our normal gangway security team, we're able to manage the temperature check. We do validate the questionnaire, by the way. So as soon as the guest gets on board, they're asked, there's a cutoff point of 4 days before, for them actually arriving, the digital questionnaire. When they get on board, they're asked to can you revalidate? If they say no, then of course we will evaluate again whether they come on board. And also part of the questionnaire says, will you adhere to the crew instructions on social distancing and face mask covering or face coverings, etc., and a checkbox for that. And it's with a German clientele, so they're very good at law abiding or following the rules and follow the regulations. So we've not had any hiccups. We haven't had any necessity so far to have additional crew to manage the COVID side of it.
Great. Now I know you spoke about improving ventilation, but has there been any, with the ventilation, cleaning germs inside the ducts?
So again, we don't necessarily have ductwork. So because in the cabins, our cabins are 20 square meters or so, so they're not massive cabins themselves, and you have your own internal air conditioning system. they are cleaned regularly anyway. So it's not a situation where they're left for months and months on end. Before every single changeover or turnover of cabin, you'd lift off the grill and you're able to clean the individual cabins. It's not duct work, it's a direct device, so there is no duct work where you go from the chiller to the actual vent. So there's no duct work in the cabins. And in the public areas, because it's not a recirculation system and you're drawing air from the outside, it literally falls from AC unit through and down into the public area. So it's not like at your house where you've got traditional ductwork. So we don't have ductwork to clean in that respect, nor are we circulating air. So it's not that we're not doing it because we don't want to do it. We don't do it because we don't have that set up.
Understood. And with your crew, you talked on how they are being protected, but are the crew still sharing cabins?
Yes, we do have shared cabins with crew. We have long-standing relationships with our crew. I mean, to the question earlier, yes, for want of a better term, the brain drain or possible losing of key crew members is vital to us. So we've done our best. We've lost nobody. In Los Angeles, we've not furloughed anybody. We've got everybody in the company working. So, and we've done that both in the US and in Europe, even to the point that the subcontractors that work for us, the cruise managers, we've been helping to subsidize them directly during these difficult times for them. So yes, we do have crew sharing cabins, but it tends to be that their brothers or their boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, they live in the same household at home. So it's not that we have complete strangers. There's definitely a common connection before they're putting into a twin share cabin crew situation. And they're in similar functions on the ship. So it's not that we have a galley member and a security guard sharing a cabin. It's galley, bar staff, housekeeping.
Understood. Now, this is a question for both of you. With the fight against COVID and the investment in additional technology, the investment in more manpower and just precautions that you're putting in place, both at Apollo and on your river cruise line, Jon, have you had to raise your prices?
No.
Have you guys thought about that? And Jon, have you guys raised your prices at all?
No, we have not. Yes, we have thought about it. Obviously, there is additional costs involved, especially if we have to operate at a reduced capacity. But our lead-in time is so long. I mean, our lead-in time can be as much as 2 years. Typically, it's more than 12 months. We're already selling 22. So our ability to adapt and modify pricing on a daily basis, it doesn't work in river cruising. You come out with a price and that's the price you sell out for that particular year, unless the world went into some strange fuel crisis. And even the last time this happened, say around 2009, where fuel prices shot, we did not impose a fuel surcharge.
Understood. Alia, any thoughts on that on your end? We do not own ships. We're just a concessionaire, so we don't have anything to do with the pricing of the cruises. But you see a lot of times ads for even discounts now, to go on cruises. So, and I'm sure it is an added cost for everybody. So they will have to see how to cover it. But I cannot comment on that.
Sure, for sure. I know last night I went for a glass of wine here in the city and there was a 15% add-on for COVID precautions. So
where do you live?
Happening. Midtown Manhattan. It's expensive,
okay.
Sort of now. But anyhow, that's all the time we have for today. I know at the beginning I said, Chris Smith might pop in. He never showed up. I said that he was going to have to purchase a cruise. I think I'm going to change that now because Alia and Jon, you guys were so wonderful. He's going to buy you guys a cruise. Get you whatever you want. You guys did a fantastic job. So all the participants today, thank you so much for attending the Seatrade Cruise webinar on how COVID-19 will affect F&B and hotel ops. In addition, thank you to you guys again to bring the webinar to life and the Seatrade Cruise employees as well. All of us uniting together will help us come back so much stronger. Just as a reminder, we will be sending a recording of the webinar tomorrow. Lastly, remember the next live webinar will be on manufacturers and suppliers. So that is made specifically for manufacturers and suppliers that are having questions on how to get through these difficult times during the pandemic. So cruise lines, if you're signed on to this and you have suppliers reaching out to you wanting advice on how to move forward, please send them to be part of this webinar. That's going to be happening on my birthday on July 30th. So it will be a good time because I'm sure the Sea Trade employees are planning a big spectacular birthday cake for me. So on behalf of Sea Trade Cruise, thank you again and talk to you all soon. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ryan.